Arizona Cardinals fans? Welcome into Believe in Arizona Cardinals, where we talk about this week's episode, which will feature the best of the rest, the 2026 NFL Draft. Last week, we talked about Jeremiyah Love, talked a bit about the fact that the Cardinals did not go and get Ty Simpson, that he went to a division rival in the Rams, and what the rest of the Cardinals preview looks like will be in this week's episode. Make sure you're listening to last week. You can make sure you leave us a 5-star review. Make sure that you're also leaving a comment if you love the show, if you want changes, at least anything there. We'll talk a little bit this week about just with the case of Aaron Rodgers being rumored and linked to the Arizona Cardinals as well, but we're going to focus on the 2026 NFL Draft, picks 2 through 7. So let's go ahead and get started. With the second pick in the second round that the Arizona Cardinals had, you were looking at the San Francisco 49ers taking Deshaun Stribling, one pick ahead, which left the Cardinals between a couple of different options. There was T.J. Parker, the edge rusher, Caden McDonald, the defensive tackle. Some people wondered if they could even take a safety and trade in Stukes. What we ended up seeing instead was the Cardinals took the best offensive lineman available, Chase Bisontis out of Texas A&M. Super athletic. He ranked in one of the top percentages when it comes to relative athleticism score, ended up being one of those guys at 6'5", 315 pounds. At one point squatted 700 pounds, just a freak athlete. Started 12 games at right tackle his freshman season, ended up being named a preseason freshman All-American. What's really interesting, at least, as far as is that he was recruited by the Cardinals offensive line coach originally, ended up working with the mentor of the Cardinals offensive line coach. So that's something that's really interesting, that you're talking about Justin Fry and how he's kind of wanted to get this guy in the building for a while. It's also interesting is that this is the first time that we have record of Monty Austinfort, the Cardinals general manager, taking an interior offensive lineman before day 3 when it comes to that pick. Now, this is a guy who started at left guard for the most part. I think he ends up being someone who could be a right guard for the Arizona Cardinals, considering that they signed Isaac Seumalo to play left guard this past offseason. Now, what is preventing Chase Bisontis from being the solution at right tackle? The answer is his arms. He only has 31 3/4 inch arms, a little bit on the smaller side there. Most offensive tackles, when you see edge rushers, are going to need to have a certain set of length and size on the outside. That's something that is super important for exterior offensive linemen or the outside guys, not as important for the inside guys. Bisontis is someone who did not give up a sack his senior season. He hasn't been the highest ranking guy according to Pro Football Focus, but when you're talking about the Cardinals building an identity, it starts with Jeremiyah Love. It starts with saying we're committing to run the football with a power running back who also has the finesse and speed to be able to get away and make a breakaway run in the open field. And in that case, you then had to say, what is the identity of Arizona going to be? Do they add to an edge rushing spot? Do they try to stop the run with an interior defensive lineman, or do they double down? And that's exactly what the Arizona Cardinals did with this pick of Bisontis. They doubled down, did not care if it was an offensive tackle. There were no really good offensive tackles available. This is, I think, a great pick. I think you give this an A pick because you say when it comes to establishing a connection for the Cardinals and understanding who they're going to be, it's recognizing I don't have a starting quarterback that's good enough to be a top 10 or maybe even top 15 quarterback in the National Football League. And what does that mean? It means you're going to need to create offense. And while Jeremiyah Love does that as well, it does speak to their doubling down on wanting to be an effective power running football team. Now, there is issues with this, of course. It means you're taking a look at John Gaines, the former day 3 draft pick, and a round 3 draft pick in Isaiah Adams, having not worked out, because if those guys were working out and being more than just a backup, you're not having to worry about taking Chase Bisontis at this spot. You could go ahead and take the edge rusher or take the defensive tackle. So instead, this shows a failure on the part of Monty Austinfort with some of those draft picks of seeing those guys develop into starters. But I do love this pick because it shows that the Cardinals are going out there to say, even if we can't get a right tackle, even if we don't have that solution for the long term on this roster, we're going to have to trot Elijah Wilkinson out there. You are at least being able to say, we're going to put the best 5 offensive linemen out there. And that's how we're going to try to win football games in 2026. So this is one of those picks that I think is a solid pick. I think that he's going to have a chance to start right away and potentially be a long-time starter at the right guard position, potentially moving to left guard in the future if he ends up being worthy of a second contract. I do think that he's a good shot to be one of those players. He's a player that many people projected to go into the first round late for day 1, ended up falling to day 2, and thank goodness the San Francisco 49ers are weird in how they work. They could have easily added him to their guard spot with how they run the football. They had a need at the interior offensive line. And said they go and take a receiver that not really many other teams were interested in Deshaun Stribling. That's just how Kyle Shanahan works. He likes his guys. He'll reach a bet on his guys. And it's worked for them sometimes in the past, and other times it doesn't work quite as well. This is one of those spots where the Cardinals, I think, benefit from the fact that they do not have to worry about the San Francisco 49ers sniping their player because they're just wired differently. Moving on to round 3 and the most controversial but understandable pick for the Arizona Cardinals. And that'd be Carson Beck, the quarterback out of Miami, guy who started at least 5 years in college, played college football for the Georgia Bulldogs as a backup for 2021 and 2022. And he shows us a lot about what Mike LaFleur is looking for in his quarterback. Because he's 6'5", 233 pounds. The report and rumors were that the Cardinals were not in on Ty Simpson at all, that they preferred Carson Beck over him. And I think that the size has a lot to do with that. They like guys who can take a hit, stand tall in the pocket. And considering they just came off of Kyler Murray, it makes all the sense in the world. Because Kyler Murray is a small running quarterback. Now, Carson Beck, at least, for the most part, he's got his flaws. His arm injury that he took place back over a year ago has sapped his elbow strength. So he doesn't have the same deep ball. He throws more interceptions as a result. But this is a guy who consistently goes out and wins games. And when you take a look at the span of quarterbacks in the NFL draft, once Ty Simpson went off of the board, you take a look at who could come in and be able to start games for the Arizona Cardinals this next year. You're talking about guys like Cole Payton from a small school, Drew Allar, who never really showed up to being anything. You talk about Garrett Nussmeier, who fell all the way to round 7 because of having multiple injury issues and failing a lot of the process of what NFL teams interviewed and wanted him to be as far as coming in to be a stand-up guy, good enough backup quarterback. He falls all the way to round 7. Out of those guys, if there's anyone who's going to be trusted to start games this year, it's going to be the guy who's got more starts under his belt than any other quarterback and was productive at the college level and improved year over year. Got better from being able to navigate the pocket, still has some of the athleticism and ability to run if needed. But this is not a pick that I was a fan of as far as the Arizona Cardinals were considered. And part of that is because while I understand the pick, Cardinals were not going to see him be there at the top of round 4. They were not going to give up draft picks to trade up for Carson Beck. You're basically drafting a backup quarterback. You take a look at the next couple of picks. You get Tyler Onyedim, a defensive tackle who can get upfield, which we'll talk a little bit about defensive tackle and why that's not as much of an issue. Kieran Crawford, the edge rusher, who won another pick. And then Markel Bell, who started quite a few games at tackle, could have been the solution at right tackle for the Arizona Cardinals. Instead, he goes to the Philadelphia Eagles. Chris McClellan going to the Packers, another guy the Cardinals had in on a top 30 workout visit. All of these are guys who could help the Cardinals out now and be able to potentially develop into starters for Arizona. So the question, of course, is why did they make this pick? And the answer is that they need to throw something at the wall and hope it sticks because they've got Jacoby Brissett and Gardner Minshew at quarterback. Neither of those guys are going to be under contract next year. So at best, You're going to be getting a guy who's starting games for you this season because those two guys are failing, or in the case of Jacoby Brissett, you're not able to work things out and have to move on. This is a spot where the Cardinals could have moved up a couple of spots to get a Jake Slaughter. They could have gotten another player available. So I understand the pick because I think Carson Beck will start games for the Cardinals this year. I think that there is no doubt that Arizona is going to have to, having spent a high enough pick, be able to see what they have in the quarterback. And it makes sense from a roster construction standpoint if you want a guy who's under contract who knows the offense. That way when you go into next year, if you do draft a quarterback, if you're kind of having to try to sign a guy in free agency, maybe you trade, however you're going to address the quarterback position in 2027. You need to have a guy who knows the offense under contract, and that's going to be Carson Beck. Some people have compared this pick to lighting a draft pick on fire. I don't think it's that bad. But I do think that Arizona could have been able to address this differently in saying, we don't need to get a quarterback next year. We've got our backups and our starters. We're all set to go. Instead, they're looking a little bit to the future. And I think at least when it comes down to this pick, they did the best that they could of getting the best quarterback available to them. And with rumors that the Cardinals could have potentially taken him as soon as pick 34, the fact that they get Chase Bisontis and take Carson Beck around later, that's at least a win in my book for it not being a loss, which would have been taking Carson Beck at 34 overall, where you're going to have to start that guy then from week 1 if you're spending a top 40 pick on the player. I don't believe that Carson Beck is going to be able to come in. I think that the potential for him is if the arm strength comes back, you have some of the different smarts, then he's able to be maybe a guy who can win you a couple games, but I don't have the highest standards for him. And I think that Arizona, by waiting until round 3 for Carson Beck, shows that they're going to be in on the quarterback class in 2027. So I don't think you put Carson Beck in that tier of, yes, he's going to be the guy. I think you put him in the tier of, he could be the guy for the Arizona Cardinals just for this current year. Now, let's go ahead and talk about one of the picks I really liked for the Arizona Cardinals more than the Carson Beck pick, and that would be Caleb Proctor out of southeastern Louisiana, the defensive tackle taken at pick 104 in the 4th round. This is a guy who gets upfield, is a penetrator, and wreaks havoc in the backfield. He needs to get a little more stout against the run. He's a little smaller. He's under 300 pounds. But he's a guy that 6'2", 295, you can pair with Walter Nolan. And on third downs, especially third and long, he will beat guys when he's on one-on-one. He will make tackles for loss in the backfield. And he's a guy that I think when you talk about how roster construction works, look at what Dante Stills has done as a late day 3 draft pick for the Arizona Cardinals, and how he's performed at a starting level and stayed healthy through the last couple of years. When it comes to building NFL teams, a lot of times you don't want to just draft a guy and pay that guy every single time. You want to have guys that you can let walk to other teams. You replace them in-house. You save money on that guy for 3 to 4 years. And then if that guy is a star level, you can pay him, or you just draft another guy during that time frame who's able to replace him, and you're able to keep that competitive advantage going. Now, Caleb Proctor broke out with 49 tackles, 6 for a loss in southeastern Louisiana, and the biggest standout for him was his LSU film from this past year. You look at him against LSU, and he looked like the best player on the field, including guys at LSU. Now, he's a small school guy, but when you talk about players that the Cardinals like and who's able to have quality starter potential, he's one of those guys. You get that guy in round 4. He's the first FCS player drafted, which comes down to, in some cases, most FCS players now are transferring using the transfer portal into larger schools. But he said he wanted to stay loyal because he's like, these are the brothers that I'm playing alongside. They're going to be at my wedding. Why would I transfer to another school? That's the sort of mentality that I think has been lost in a lot of mercenary-heavy college football. I think it speaks outstanding factors about his character as well. I love the pick of Caleb Proctor out of southeastern Louisiana, and one pick that I did like next is the pick of Reggie Virgil out of Texas Tech. Not a burner when it comes to speed. He's a 4.57 guy. Not a 4.3, but he gets vertical, gets open deep. You want to talk about a guy who gets vertical and with good route running and separation, DeAndre Hopkins. Now, that's not the comparison for him, I think you're lucky if Reggie Virgil can go out there in his first year and can seize the wide receiver 5 position and make plays on special teams. We'll talk more about special teams here in a second, but Reggie Virgil is one of those players who I think is going to be a, in case of emergency, break glass when it comes to Marvin Harrison Jr. and Michael Wilson, both of whom have had injury issues the past couple of years. You're talking about in Virgil, a guy at 6'3", who's a little more slight at 187, but for a 5th-round pick, he led, I believe it was the Miami of Ohio, in receiving yards at 816. This year, he led Texas Tech in receiving. They were not a great team, did not have a great quarterback, only 676 receiving yards. But he averaged 20 yards per receiving at Miami of Ohio. Deep threat sort of guy. He can play outside at the X. He's best suited as a flanker at the Z, opposite of the... And he's one of those guys where if you're going to talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. missing a game or two, I think he can slide right in and be able to replicate some, maybe not all, of that production. And if the Cardinals end up not wanting to pay Michael Wilson, he could potentially have starter upside. But at the very least this year, you're looking for a guy who can give you depth, can upgrade your outside. And this will also allow Kendrick Bourne to man your slot position along with Marvin Harrison Jr. He's a guy the Cardinals did have a top 30 visit with. And he had 107 total yards and 3 touchdowns in a win over UCF this past year. One of those guys who I think what a lot of Cardinals fans are thinking he could end up being, but he could be Antoine Wesley, a fellow Texas Red Raider, but fully realized. Wesley was able to have a couple of games with 80-plus yards and 2 touchdowns, being that red zone threat, but he just wasn't good enough off the line to be able to make things happen, and he didn't have the speed. Virgil does not have the speed, but I think he's quicker than fast, which means that he can still get open, be able to get vertical. We've seen this before where there's guys who just because they don't run the fastest 40, it doesn't mean that they can't be a deep threat. But I do think it does cap his upside overall as far as how high of a level starter he can be. And this is going to be a spot. He's going to come in looking to compete. He's got plenty of other competition for that. I think he'll make the roster, obviously, being a 5th-round draft pick. But it's going to put pressure on Marvin Harrison Jr. to have that big breakout year that everyone's looking for. Now we've got our last 2 draft picks here, which will be more special teams related. We'll be right back here on Believe in Arizona Cardinals to talk about that, plus the Aaron Rodgers dilemma, why I think that it's a bad idea for the Arizona Cardinals to even be in the conversation. We're going to be talking about the last couple of draft picks here for Arizona. This is a pick that I like the pick, but I don't know if I like the selection, or at least the placement, and that's going to be Carson Sharar, the linebacker out of Iowa. This is your Dennis Gardeck replacement. Let's be perfectly frank about that. He's a guy that is a undersized linebacker, didn't really get to start until this past year, but he's got every sort of heart and toughness that you want when it comes to making plays on special teams, maybe being an undersized linebacker. He needs to improve somewhat in his instincts and coverage. But he is a guided missile. The special teams captain exploded when it came to making plays this past year. Got to start with Iowa and the Hawkeyes. At 6'1", 231 pounds, he's going to be a little bit smaller than what you're looking for in your linebacker. Because he's going to bring it on special teams, the hope is that he can be your Justin Bethel, your special teams captain, great locker room guy, be someone that you're able to completely trust when it comes to being a leader in terms of the Arizona Cardinals and developing into that guy. The problem is you probably could have gotten him around later. You look at some of the other draft picks that went around there. Inez Cooper, the guard, went. You got J.C. Davis, the tackle, went over to Illinois. Jack Kelly, a productive starting linebacker who's just as similar of a missile, went to the New York Giants out of BYU. And Pat Coogan, the underrated center, who was the player of the game in one of the playoff games for Indiana, could have been potentially a long-term starter at center in the future for you. He goes right after this pick is made. I think the Cardinals would have been better suited taking one of those guys on the offensive line. But there was probably someone else they were targeting instead. I think that I would have gone with that and then been able to find a potential upgrade. But it is a spot where he's got everything that you're looking for as far as it comes to... It's one of those players also when he got picked, most people are like, who? He was supposed to be undrafted, maybe a 7th-round pick for the most part. He had a breakout season in 2025 with 83 tackles, 12 for a loss, a pass deflection, started for them at linebacker. And Iowa just pumps out guys when it comes to lunch pail, blue-collar style guys in the NFL. He originally was a Iowa born and raised guy, going to have that lunch pail mentality like we talked about. And I like the pick. I just think, like has been said already here, you could have gotten him another round later. Now, the guy that the Cardinals did get a round later is Jaden Williams, who's had a lot of starts. He played college football for the Ole Miss Rebels, 6'4", 300 pounds. Former basketball guy, and he started at left tackle his freshman season as a redshirt. Started 13 games. And then he had some time. He had injuries that derailed his part of his career, his junior season. He had a daughter. That was something that factored in as well, of just becoming a father, having to have that maturity. But he then switched to right tackle and was a 15-game starter, only allowed 2 sacks throughout the season. He's got good enough wingspan, at least, as far as he's got 33.5-inch arms, maybe not the 34 inches that you're looking for. He started a ton of games. So the question is, why did he end up falling this far? The answer is that he's still a relatively raw player. He's got good quickness. He's got a good punch. But he's a little bit late in some of his reaction times for the most part. It looks like he could be a capable backup. I think he's going to be competing for your swing tackle position. And he's going to be joining with the Cardinals now, bringing in a 2026 setup of Udo, of Elijah Wilkinson, of Matt Pryor, I believe at least, who can play inside or outside, of Josh Fryer, who started some games at right tackle for them last year. Christian Jones is still on the roster. There is a ton of guys at the tackle spot. Cardinals are throwing mashed potatoes at the wall and hoping that it sticks when it comes to their right tackle situation after Elijah Wilkinson, who started, I believe, 16 to 17 games for the Atlanta Falcons last season. I think that this is a guy who has the potential to compete with Josh Fryer for the swing tackle role, but it seems like he may be a practice squad year one guy if the other guy's experience wins out. I do think it spells the end of Christian Jones and his time on the roster. He has stayed unable to stay healthy. There's been issues and problems that has popped up with him. I think that what is really interesting, at least, with Jaden Williams is that he started enough games. He has that potential there, but it really is going to plan out to see, do the Cardinals go after Calvin Beachum when it comes closer to draft time, or excuse me, camp time. So when we put the draft together, at least with everything like that, here's what the Cardinals walk away with. Cardinals have not improved at the right tackle spot. That was one of the biggest needs that they have. They only get one guy in the 7th round, don't get a guy earlier. Part of that because of the drafting of Carson Beck in the 3rd round, taking him over another offensive tackle. There was not an offensive tackle that fell to the Arizona Cardinals that had to use the Carson Beck pick to probably move up for a guy. They instead get Chase Bisontis, improve the interior of the offensive line. You get a defensive tackle in Caleb Proctor, who's able to add depth and be able to get upfield. I could see him rotating in on 3rd down snaps with Walter Nolan wrecking havoc. You get a receiver who's able to help flesh out and kind of finish that room in Reggie Virgil. You end up with a special teams guy in Carson Sharar and a guy who will probably be a practice squad or compete for that swing tackle role in Jaden Williams. What is the spots that the Arizona Cardinals did not improve for this year? Well, part of it is they're stuck with the tight end room. They're relying a lot on Tip Ryman. They have Elijah Higgins coming in as a receiver spot, but it's going to be heavily invested into Tip Ryman this past year. They did not improve the center room. They got Halte Froholt and Hayden Connor are still there, with John Gaines also being a likely backup center. They do improve the quarterback room, but not at a starter level, more at a backup level who can potentially spot start. And the biggest takeaway, of course, they do not address edge rusher, safety, cornerback at all. The only pick that they spent on the linebacker spot is Carson Sharar in the 6th round. This was a heavy offensive draft, with Caleb Proctor and Carson Sharar the 2 picks, both of those being on day 3. I liked those picks, but you're talking about a lot of pressure on the Arizona Cardinals being on second-year linebacker Jordan Birch, on Baron Browning being able to show off more than he did last year. We already know what Zaven Collins is. He's a good run stopper who can occasionally get a sack. Cardinals do not really end up addressing the biggest need that they had at edge rusher position. And that being said, they had a choice to make between the best player available in Jeremiyah Love or grabbing a guy who could be an edge rusher, and they chose to go with the running back. Despite not having a need at running back, they at least upgrade at a playmaking spot. And that's what this draft is really going to come down to, I think, for Arizona, is how do the other picks work out? Because after Jeremiyah Love, the rest of the draft was like chalk. You knew they were going to take an offensive lineman or a defensive lineman. You knew they were probably going to take a quarterback. You knew they were going to probably grab a receiver with how many guys they met with in the NFL draft, with how Reggie Virgil was a guy that seemed high enough on their board. They seemed excited about him. And you knew they were going to flesh out special teams with their late picks. But boy, let me tell you, this is a draft that seems like it is probably, outside of the Jeremiyah Love, you give it a B. With the Jeremiyah Love pick, a lot of people would probably give this one a lower draft selection. I think at the end of the day, I would give this a C+, almost a B-. But I think that a lot of it comes down to that Jeremiyah Love pick is going to be what it really centers around. If he becomes a star player immediately, which is what he's expected to do, can that be enough to get the Cardinals wins in 2026? Or is this simply prepping for what's going to be an all-important 2027 NFL draft? That's something that remains to be seen. Let's wrap up today's show here and talk a little bit about the Aaron Rodgers rumors, because there's been rumblings that the Steelers are getting fed up with Aaron Rodgers. There's questions and people are saying, hey, Nathaniel Hackett, one of his favorite offensive coordinators that he worked with. A lot of people are saying that they would have thought that Rodgers would have decided by now. And people are saying, hey, this could be a spot where he liked Nathaniel Hackett. Cardinals have a need for a starter at quarterback. And instead of just paying Jacoby Brissett the money that he is holding out for, why not pay Aaron Rodgers some of that money instead? At 43 years old, try to get an upgrade at the spot. And here's where I think we stand. There's two things. There's the reality world, and then there's the let's imagine world. Here's what I think is the let's imagine world. The let's imagine world is that Aaron Rodgers on the Arizona Cardinals may be a slight upgrade, but when you take a look at other statistics with QBR, look at the arm strength, look at how quick he had to get the ball out, the lack of a deep ball that he had last year. At 43 years of age, Aaron Rodgers is not going to move the needle enough for the Arizona Cardinals to get them to the playoffs in 2026. And if it's going to be a quarterback that you're bringing in with all the drama and everything that comes along with him, you need to have that quarterback be good enough to get you to the playoffs to justify the drama. And Aaron Rodgers is not at that stage of his career where he's good enough to get there. He was not good enough last year to get a Steelers team with a better defense and good offensive weapons, a good offensive line, a great run game to the playoffs last year. So some people say Arizona's got better weapons. Great, but that defense did not get improved. That means you're going to have Aaron Rodgers stepping back a lot, having to take hits while he's dropping back, throwing the ball. That's going to be a lot of checkdowns for an older quarterback, which will help Jeremiyah Love as far as fantasy points. But it's not going to help the Arizona Cardinals win games. At that point, you would much rather have Jacoby Brissett. Maybe you pay him a little bit, get some of those non-guaranteed money just converted into guarantees, and recognize you're not going to win as many games with Jacoby as Aaron Rodgers, but that may be a good thing, because then you are, as the Arizona Cardinals, setting yourselves up for a top 5 pick in 2027, and Aaron Rodgers may also be a good enough quarterback to win you out of that, where let's say that Aaron Rodgers gets you to 7 or 8 wins next year. Suddenly you're having to give up 3 first-round picks to have to trade up. You didn't make the playoffs, and it was kind of a wash. Aaron Rodgers goes and decides to potentially retire or just goes through yet another aspect of having to hold out and keep you in waiting to know if he's going to retire or not. Now, that is the let's imagine this scenario, be realistic. Now let's go to the actual, what I would say, reality of what's happening. As Aaron Rodgers loves attention. He wants to be able to always be in the news cycle, have people being able to talk about him. Is he going to stay? Is he going to retire? Where is he going to go? And I think this Cardinal situation is the perfect opportunity to put that into the headlines. You got multiple articles written about it, people connecting Rodgers and Hackett to Arizona. It keeps his name in the news. But I think what's going to happen in the reality is that he's going to either just decide to hang it up with a huge announcement, but I don't think he wants to. I think that closer to camp, when it gets around to that, he's going to make his decision. It's going to go on the Pat McAfee show, talk about everything that's there, decide he's going to be playing. It's going to be a big hullabaloo, and I believe he's going to be going back to the Steelers, because why would you take on the Arizona Cardinals in a rebuild compared to a Pittsburgh Steelers team that almost made the playoffs last year? You have familiarity, and you have even more familiarity with a former head coach in Mike McCarthy that you've already played with before. And unlike Nathaniel Hackett, you had true success with. You had some success with Hackett, but that was mostly under the Matt LaFleur system that he had those multiple MVPs. When it came to Nathaniel Hackett going to the Jets were thinking, not the Jets, the Broncos. Broncos were thinking they could get Aaron Rodgers. Ended up being Russell Wilson they got instead. And everything went belly up, and Hackett got fired, of course, before the season ended. I think the Cardinals should stay away from Aaron Rodgers because of that drama that's created. I think that who he is now is still a step up from Russell Wilson. There's still plays that are there to be made. But I don't believe he's at that ability to elevate this Cardinals roster, and I think he could then jeopardize what could be a long-term, remember he's 43, sustainable outlook at the quarterback position. And that's why I think the Cardinals, I'd love it if they were able to just simply go out there, fix everything up with Jacoby Brissett, get that cemented with him as the starting quarterback to enter this year, and put Aaron Rodgers and all of those rumblings of him coming in to the Cardinals to bed, because they don't need him. Do they need him more than what they currently have? Yeah, but do they need him for the long-term approach? And I think the answer is they don't need that drama. They don't need that smoke. And that's why if I was the Arizona Cardinals, I would go out there and put in a little bit of news, just saying we trust who we have in mind, we've got what we're needing, and put everything into the 2027 NFL Draft without having to worry about some sort of twist ending that we all know is probably at some point. The NFL is not for long, whether it ends with Rodgers hurt and injured, unable to play, or finishing up the season with multiple checkdowns because of not having that same arm strength anymore. It is going to end in tears. There isn't really a happy ending when it comes to 43-year-old quarterbacks, as we saw with Tom Brady the following year before he retired, and it's the same with Aaron Rodgers and the Arizona Cardinals. That'll wrap it up here for us. Make sure you're following Believe in Arizona Cardinals. Make sure you like and subscribe. Always make sure you're leaving a 5-star review if you love our content. Make sure that you're following here at Blake Murphy 7. We'll have a couple of other special guests are coming up here, trying to empty out the Rolodex, as it were, to celebrate the installation of taking over for the Believe podcast. Super excited. Make sure you're also following at Believe Network as well for all the latest news and reports coming to you, at least from Believe. Thank you again, guys, for tuning in. This has been Believe in Arizona Cardinals. I'm Blake Murphy. We'll see you guys next time.